Today, in around 10 minutes, we will focus on when is a sign a sign. What I mean by that is the fundamental starting point of semiotics. What is an actual semiotic sign? Well, in Peircean terms, a semiotic sign is not a sign until it is perceived as a sign. We will explore that conundrum in today's video, and in doing so, begin our journey into how a concept is represented through three iconic indexical and symbolic levels. In just 10 minutes, I'll have you rethinking what you think you know those terms mean. After all, we are in the context of pragmatic semiotic theory. Then we'll see how semiosis' power was in plain sight all the time in our sketchbook scribblings without us knowing. Together, within Peirce's semiotic sign action, we will reimagine your ideation design processes. Again, it will be a theory-packed 10 minutes of semiosis in design-centric terms. So, stay tuned. Subscribe below. Hit that bell. Let's go. Welcome to this week's talk. This week we're going to focus in on a sort of like fundamental, obvious elements that can get lost in the theory. And this is one that I have to keep reminding my students when they struggle with the theory and focusing on the fundamental aspect of when is a sign a sign. Okay, so we're talking about obviously semiotic signs here. And let's just go back to Peirce as our starting point, who says nothing is a sign unless it is interpreted as a sign. And over the weeks we'll keep revisiting this fundamental point that a piece of visual communication, or what we hope is visual communication, an image, a piece of design, doesn't begin to work semiotically until our target audience interprets it as something more than just an image. Okay, hold that thought, because that's where we're going to explore from now on. So let's just remind ourselves of semiosis, sign action. Peirce calls this semiosis. That's his word for sign action. And the determination flow of how sign action works from a Peircean point of view is we start off with the concept to be communicated. Peirce calls it the object. Graphic design, illustration, visual communication design, we're using design-centric terms here, and we're going to call it the concept to be communicated. The concept comes from the brief, the client, the needs of the brief. So the concept is where we start it. And as designers, as illustrators, we look for visual language to communicate that concept in some way. So how that is represented is our second part of the sign action. But how we represent something of the concept that needs to be communicated is not enough. Now, semiology, the signified and the signifier and the signified, those two elements working together only takes us so far. And this is where Peirce is really useful for designers from very early stages of designing, because it doesn't just stop with the two, the dyadic. It just doesn't stop with the two of the signifier and the signified. It goes from the concept we need to communicate, how is that represented to our target audience? How will it be interpreted so that the target audience can make the connection to the concept? So by bringing the target audience into the semiotics of how we represent the concept, it enriches our ability to enhance the visual communication to our target audience. And that's where we're going to springboard into today's talk further, because we're going to focus in on the audience and how the actual concept we need to communicate is interpreted by that target audience. How we do that? Well, we're focusing on just the first part, the concept. And in Peircean semiosis, what we have here is essentially Peirce works on triadic elements, elements of threes working together, and those three elements working together at different subclasses of low, middle, and high functionality. These are the things that power Peircean semiotics that we as visual communication designers, graphic designers, illustrators can really hone our skills on. Okay, so we're only focusing on one of those three triadic elements, and that's the one for concept. How do we represent the concept? Well, Peirce calls it the icon, the index, and the symbol. But what we will do is we will approach it from the adjective, because there are issues with the terms. The word iconic has different connotations, different understandings what iconic means, and different uses of it. And as I said in previous videos and future videos, when we use the word iconic and symbolic, we're doing it purely within the framework of Peircean theory. So I just want you to bracket your thinking just to this within semiosis. Never mind any other meaning of the word iconic. It means something particular in semiosis, and that's what we're focusing on. And it helps us, well, it helps the target audience interpret the concept, and that's where I'm getting to with this. So let's explore these things. What do we mean by these things? Well, iconic is the lowest subclass of how to represent the concept within semiosis, within semiotics. The iconic, think of it as the building blocks, the fundamental building blocks from which great design and great illustration can be built upon. You don't build a cathedral straight away. You build it one brick at a time, one block at a time. And that's essentially the metaphor we're going to use for iconic. And what does iconic mean in the context of semiosis? Well, think about resemblances, qualities and resemblances and perception, because it's a very qualitative way of recognizing that certain shapes, certain lines, certain colors, certain textures have meaning, intrinsic meaning, that is contextual to, one, how they're placed together in a design, and two, our own experiences that we can bring to that to recognize then when we see this color and that line and that texture in this way, it resembles something we already know. It resembles qualities that we already have, that putting together in the context we're seeing them suggests to us it could be a possibility of being a. Okay, so it's that level of quite qualitative, non-defined initial interpretations of that reminds me of, or that's a bit like, oh, that looks a bit like. That's where iconic starts to work. And if that starts to work, then we are starting semiosis, the process of sign action, because all of a sudden something that was just a line now has some meaning that we're looking for. It takes on an iconic level of representation that we're looking for, because it could suggest something else. So all of a sudden, when it's a sign, it's when we start adding meaning to something that is at an iconic level. That reminds me of this, or that reminds me of that. Moving up a level, indexical, the middle subclass of how to represent the concept, is when we pick out the concept by means of pointing. If you think about your index finger, we use that to point at things that are there in front of us, things that we can see, and things that we know, that we try and communicate to other people. Go, oh, it's there. Similar approach to understanding what indexical representation is within Peircean semiotic theory. We are talking about how to craft our visual language to point to existing things. So those existing things could be real things in the real world that we can pick up and we can move and we can share, we can hand over to somebody else and we know it's there. But it could also be ideas, It could be ideas from literature. It could be ideas from philosophy. It could be all kinds of different things. So an idea is also an existent thing. Think about memes. It's an existent thing that exists, but it may not be tangible, but it exists. So in Dexical, we move up our representation, and as soon as people start seeing the things that we are crafting in our visual communication, they go, that is bang. So moving from that reminds me of, or that a possibility that could become that is, that is, it's pointing at an existent thing from our experience as the target audience that we already know, that you as the designer has crafted for us to start that process of moving up to enhancing the visual communication to work at an indexical level. Moving one level up to symbolic, this is where the concept is understood and interpreted as a convention or a rule. So at this level, the highest level of semiotic representation within sign action, within semiosis, the symbolic level of communication is a general level because it transcends any individuality of meaning, and the whole of the target audience agrees that when they see these things together, it means that. So it's no longer just about, that is that as an existent thing, but all these things come together to actually suggest, this means that now. What do I mean by that? Well, think about any piece of branding, any logo. When we see the iconic shapes within a logo, that we go, okay, that now means Coca-Cola. That now means, when we see these things together, Shell. That now means Costa Coffee. Whatever the brand is, when we see these things together at a symbolic level, the conventional rule is when we see them like that, it means this. Now, of course, if you've never heard of any of those organizations, then the branding won't make any difference whatsoever. It will only exist at a iconic level. So when is a sign? Essentially, it's when the audience makes the interpretation based upon their experience that has been crafted, hopefully craftily, by the visual communication designer, the illustrator, the graphic designer, to be successfully interpreted. And the fundamental building blocks of getting that process of interpretation kick-started towards what we need the target audience to gain from the piece of visual communication that we are designing is for the semiosis, the semiotic signs we include in our design work to actually communicate the concept that we want the audience to take from that. If the audience don't engage in that interpretation successfully, they will just see the image, the pretty pictures that we produced and walk away from it. But if they get engaged, and that might be for a fraction longer than 30 seconds, it may be for a lifetime, but once they engage in interpreting what does this mean, not just reading it, but actually taking in the whole tone, the whole attitude, the language, the use of typography, the use of imagery to reinforce the concept. Think, about the reinforcing of the concept. All starts with the very fundamental building blocks, which is the iconic building blocks. As soon as the iconic building blocks are interpreted as a possibility, this could mean that, that's when semiosis, sign action, is kick-started. Over the coming weeks, we'll go into more depth about what does that mean and how can we enhance that, use that to enhance our visual communication. So come back and watch more of these videos. So that is our 10 minutes of Percy and Semiosis 101 for this week. Now, we see that designing semiotic visual communication is a natural part of our existing design process. As Polanyi, in his book, The Tacit Dimension, clarifies for us visual communication designers, is that we know what and we know how to solve design problems. But we creatives refer to this knowledge as tacit knowledge, as a knowledge we cannot tell. With your blossoming understanding of semiosis, you can now build up theoretical bricks of knowledge and begin to explain first to yourself how you build successful and effective visual communication for your intended audience. In Peirce's semiosis, its sign-action power between what the concept is, how it is represented, which facilitates an interpretation, sets its foundation levels in iconic, indexical, and symbolic representation. Now, these building blocks are integral in all aspects of how we design or illustrate, which leads our intended audience's interpretation connotatively to the intended concept and message. Over the coming weeks in Semiosis 101, we will explore further how iconic, indexical, and symbolic representation can be manipulated and applied to enhance visual communication in illustration and graphic design. There will be another video next week, so subscribe, hit the bell, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon. Hi, if you've watched these videos before, you probably know by now I'm Dave Wood, a design educator and researcher, a published design author, and I've worked commercially as both a freelance illustrator and graphic designer. The guy behind the theory, Charles Sanders Peirce, was a philosopher, a mathematician, and a theorist, but he wasn't a creative. Each week on this Scout Scott Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, I'll post at least one 10-minute explainer video on an aspect of Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory. Each free Semiosis 101 10-minute video will use designer-centric terms instead of theoretical language so that illustrators and graphic designers can understand and follow. Each video will feature a take-home piece of applicable semiotic theory, and they do interconnect to build up your understanding of semiosis. But this channel is not a course in semiotics per se. Instead, each video is a bite-sized illustrated piece of new knowledge on sign action, or semiosis as Peirce names it. The aim of these free videos is to take Peirce's quite complex philosophical theoretical language and put it in the context of designing visual communication, whether these are illustrations, motion, branding, packaging, editorial, etc. By subscribing to this Scout Scott Semiosis 101 YouTube channel, you will learn how Peirce's pragmatic semiotic theory of semiosis can help to enhance and improve how you visually communicate. I have many more Peircean semiotic topics to discuss, but I'd be interested in hearing about your semiotic ideas. Add a comment below. If you like this video, check out my other semiotic videos and consider liking and sharing those videos with others. The more we creatives discuss semiotic theory, the easier its application into our creative processes will be. As a fellow creative and a published design author, I have a link in the description to my Scout Scott website where you can find all the Semiosis 101 videos and read background info on the blog. You can download free Semiosis 101 video transcripts and reading lists. You can buy illustrated and typographical gift ranges on my Redbubble shop. You can also buy my 2014 design book published by Bloomsbury Publishing, Interface Design and Introduction to Visual Communication in UI Design. Over the years, I have collaborated with other design academic researchers and Peircean semioticians to develop a designer-centric explanation of Peirce's theoretical language. If you are interested in reading my semiotic Rosetta Stone academic writing, then you can visit my academia.edu link in the description. Any other books on Peircean semiotics or design I've mentioned in the videos are also listed in the description. Check them out too. Thanks for watching. Check out the other videos, like and share them with your friends, and hit the bell and subscribe buttons to be notified when next week's video is published. You can also follow Semiosis 101 on the socials for updates. It's Scout_Scott on Instagram and Semiosis 101 on Twitter. See you all again next week for more Semiosis 101 to help illustrators and designers to enhance your visual communication skills.